What happens when journalism's most respected voice meets Hollywood's most controversial royal? You won't believe what unfolds when Anderson Cooper's signature no-nonsense approach collides head-on with Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public persona in what became the most explosive television moment of the year. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses go toe-to-toe on live television. Last night's episode of Anderson Cooper 360 was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about Meghan's latest philanthropic ventures and her upcoming documentary series. What viewers witnessed instead was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when hard-hitting journalism meets celebrity damage control. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan walked onto the set. Cooper, known for his meticulous preparation and razor-sharp questioning, had clearly done his homework. Sources inside CNN revealed that the news anchor had spent days reviewing recent court documents, financial filings, and contradictory statements from Meghan's previous interviews. What he discovered would set the stage for one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in recent television history. As Meghan settled into her chair, adjusting her perfectly pressed blazer and flashing that trademark smile, Cooper's expression remained stoically professional. The contrast was striking, her carefully orchestrated warmth against his journalistic steel. Little did viewers know they were about to witness a verbal chess match, where every move had been calculated, and the stakes couldn't be higher. "Meghan, thank you for joining us tonight," Cooper began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that has made him one of America's most trusted news anchors. "I want to start by discussing your recent charitable initiatives, but I think our viewers deserve some clarity on certain discrepancies that have emerged." The word discrepancies hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that trained observers would later analyze frame by frame. She recovered quickly, leaning forward slightly in what body language experts would describe as a defensive posture disguised as engagement. "Of course, Anderson. I'm always happy to provide clarity," she replied, her voice carrying that practiced blend of sincerity and slight vulnerability that had served her so well in previous interviews. But Cooper wasn't buying it, and his next question would prove he had come armed with facts, not fluff. "Let's talk about the Archwell Foundation's financial statements. Our investigative team has uncovered some concerning patterns in how donated funds have been allocated. Can you explain why administrative costs have consumed nearly 70% of all donations received in the past fiscal year?" The question hit like a sledgehammer. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately, but the pause before her response lasted just a beat too long. In that silence, you could practically hear the wheels turning as she calculated her next move. The practiced smile remained, but something had shifted in her eyes, a hardness that viewers were about to see a lot more of. "Anderson, I think you're working with outdated information," she said, her tone still controlled but now carrying a subtle edge. "Our foundation operates with complete transparency, and I'm surprised that CNN would present allegations without giving us the opportunity to provide context beforehand. It was a classic deflection technique. Question the source, shift blame, and maintain the moral high ground." But Cooper had spent decades dealing with politicians, celebrities, and world leaders who all employed the same playbook. His response was surgical in its precision. "The documents I'm referencing are from your foundation's own filings with the IRS, submitted just 3 months ago. These aren't allegations, Meghan. These are your own reported numbers. Would you like me to walk through the specific line items that raised red flags with our financial analysts?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since the interview began, her media-trained composure showed hairline cracks. She was no longer dealing with softball questions about her latest projects or her family life. This was investigative journalism at its finest, and she was clearly unprepared for the level of scrutiny Cooper was bringing to bear. "I think what's happening here is a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern philanthropic organizations operate," Meghan said, her voice now carrying a slight tremor that she couldn't quite suppress. "The work we do requires significant infrastructure, legal compliance, and professional staff. These aren't frivolous expenses, they're necessary investments in our mission. Cooper nodded slowly, but his expression remained unchanged. He had clearly anticipated this response and was ready with his follow-up. What came next would push the conversation into territory that no amount of media training could have prepared Meghan for. "I understand operational costs are necessary," Cooper replied, his voice maintaining that steady, professional tone that somehow made his words even more devastating. "But when we compare your foundation's overhead to similar organizations of your size and scope, the numbers are troubling. Doctors Without Borders operates with 12% administrative costs. The American Red Cross maintains 18%. Can you help our viewers understand why Archuel requires nearly 6 times that amount just to function?" The comparison was brutal in its clarity. Cooper hadn't just done his homework. He had built an airtight case that would be impossible to dismiss or deflect. Meghan's carefully constructed public image was being systematically dismantled on live television, and everyone in the studio could feel the growing tension as she struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse. But what happened next would transform an already uncomfortable interview into something far more explosive, as Meghan's facade finally began to crack under the pressure of Cooper's relentless pursuit of the truth. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Meghan finally responded, her voice now carrying a sharp edge that viewers had never heard before. "Anderson, I have to say I'm disappointed in the direction this conversation has taken. I came here tonight to discuss meaningful work, not to be ambushed with what amounts to a character assassination disguised as journalism." The word ambushed resonated through the studio like a battle cry. Cooper's eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly, the only visible reaction to what was clearly an attempt to reframe the narrative and put him on the defensive. But if Meghan thought she could intimidate one of television's most seasoned journalists, she had severely miscalculated. "These are legitimate questions about public financial records, Meghan," Cooper replied, his voice remaining steady despite the accusation. "When your foundation solicits donations from the public, those contributors have a right to know how their money is being used. This isn't character assassination. This is accountability." Meghan's laugh was sharp and humorless, a sound that cut through the studio's tense atmosphere like broken glass. "Accountability? Is that what we're calling this hit piece? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels more like the same kind of targeted harassment that drove me out of one country and across an ocean." The royal family reference was unmistakable, and Cooper recognized the deflection for exactly what it was. Meghan was attempting to invoke sympathy by positioning herself as a victim of media persecution, but Cooper had dealt with this tactic countless times before. His response would prove that he wasn't going to allow the conversation to be derailed by emotional manipulation. "We're not discussing your time in the UK, Meghan. We're discussing financial transparency in American charitable organizations. Your foundation received over $15 million in donations last year alone. Don't you think the people who contributed that money deserve to know that less than $4.5 million actually went to charitable causes?" The specific numbers hit like physical blows. Meghan's composure, already strained, began showing more significant cracks. Her hands, previously folded calmly in her lap, now gripped the arms of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. The practiced smile had vanished entirely, replaced by something far more authentic and far more dangerous. "Those numbers are misleading and taken completely out of context," she snapped, her voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "You're cherry-picking data to support a predetermined narrative. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible journalism that destroys lives and reputations." Cooper leaned forward slightly, his journalist instincts fully engaged now that his subject was showing her true colors. "Then help me understand the context, Meghan. Walk our viewers through why it cost $10.5 million to run an organization that donated $4.5 million to actual charitable causes, because those numbers suggest something very different from the transparency and efficiency your foundation claims to represent." The mathematical breakdown was devastating in its simplicity. Even viewers with no background in nonprofit management could understand the implications of what Cooper was presenting. Meghan realized she was losing the narrative battle and decided to escalate the confrontation in a way that would shock everyone watching. "You know what, Anderson? I think our viewers deserve to know about your own financial dealings before you start throwing stones. How much did CNN pay you to ambush me tonight? How much advertising revenue is this network generating by turning my philanthropic work into tabloid entertainment? The personal attack represented a complete breakdown of interview protocol. Cooper's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. 25 years of broadcast journalism had taught him that losing his temper would only give his subject exactly what she wanted, a way to shift focus from her own accountability. My salary is public record, as required by SEC filings. CNN's advertising revenue is also publicly disclosed. Your foundation's internal expense allocations, however, remain mysteriously vague despite multiple requests for clarification from financial oversight organizations. Meghan's face flushed with what could only be described as barely contained rage. The careful mask she had worn for years of public appearances was now completely gone, replaced by someone who was clearly not accustomed to being held accountable for her actions. What came out of her mouth next would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "This is harassment, plain and simple," she declared, her voice now trembling with anger rather than nerves. "You're using your platform to bully someone who has dedicated their life to service. This isn't journalism. This is a vendetta disguised as an interview, and I won't sit here and be victimized by someone who clearly has an agenda." The victimization narrative was in full swing now, but Cooper wasn't having any of it. His next question would push the confrontation into territory that neither of them could retreat from, setting up what would become one of the most explosive exits in television history. "A vendetta?" Cooper's voice carried just the slightest hint of incredulity. "Meghan, asking questions about financial transparency isn't harassment. It's journalism. But since you've raised the subject of agendas, let's talk about the salary your foundation pays you as its executive director. Can you tell our viewers why you're compensating yourself $800,000 annually from charitable donations while claiming to work for humanitarian causes?" The final bombshell had been dropped, and the explosion was about to tear through everything Meghan had carefully built. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. $800,000. For a moment, the studio fell into complete silence as viewers across America processed what they had just heard. Meghan's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, rage, and finally something that looked almost like panic as she realized there was no spin sophisticated enough to explain away this revelation. "That's completely false," she said, but her voice lacked any conviction. The denial sounded hollow even to her own ears, and Cooper's unwavering stare made it clear he had the documentation to back up every word. "My compensation is in line with industry standards for executive directors of major foundations." Cooper's response was swift and merciless. "Industry standards for foundations your size typically range between $150,000 to $300,000 annually. You're paying yourself nearly 3 times the highest end of that spectrum. More importantly, you're doing it with money that donors believed was going directly to charitable causes." The mathematical reality was inescapable, and Meghan knew it. Her entire carefully constructed narrative about selfless service and humanitarian dedication was crumbling in real time on national television. The woman who had spent years cultivating an image of sacrificial public service was being exposed as someone who had found a way to monetize charity at an unprecedented level. "You don't understand the complexity of what we do," Meghan said, her voice now desperate and defensive. "The relationships we maintain, the strategic partnerships we develop, the global reach of our initiatives. This isn't some small-town charity running bake sales. This is sophisticated, high-level philanthropic work that requires expertise and experience." Cooper nodded slowly, but his expression remained unchanged. "Then let's talk about results. With over $15 million in donations and your substantial compensation, what measurable impact has Archewell achieved? How many people have actually been helped by all this sophisticated, high-level work?" The question struck at the heart of everything. After all the marketing, all the press releases, all the celebrity appearances and networking events, what had actually been accomplished? Meghan's hesitation before answering told viewers everything they needed to know. "We've initiated dozens of programs across multiple continents," she began. But Cooper cut her off with surgical precision. "Initiated isn't completed, Meghan. Our research team contacted the organizations you claim to have partnered with. Most had no record of receiving significant funding from Archewell. Others described your involvement as photo opportunities, rather than substantial partnerships. One director told us, and I'm quoting directly here, that your foundation's contribution was more about publicity than actual support. The walls were closing in from all sides now. Every escape route Meghan had relied on in previous interviews was being systematically blocked by Cooper's meticulous preparation. The journalist had built an airtight case that was impossible to deflect, deny, or spin away. "This is unconscionable," Meghan said, her voice rising to nearly a shout. "You're destroying the work of an organization that helps people because you want to create controversy for ratings. This isn't journalism. This is character assassination. And I won't be a part of it anymore." She began to stand up from her chair, but Cooper wasn't finished. "Before you leave, Meghan, don't you think you owe the viewers who donated to your foundation an explanation? Don't you think they deserve to know why their money went to executive salaries instead of the causes they believed they were supporting?" The question stopped her cold. For a moment, she stood frozen between sitting and leaving, the weight of accountability pressing down on her like a physical force. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely controlled fury. "How dare you question my commitment to service? How dare you sit there in your comfortable studio and judge the work that people like me do in the real world? You have no idea what it's like to actually put yourself on the line for causes that matter." Cooper's response was delivered with the calm authority that had made him one of America's most respected journalists. "I've reported from war zones, natural disasters, and humanitarian crises around the world, Meghan. I've seen real service, real sacrifice, and real results. What I haven't seen is evidence that your foundation represents any of those things." The comparison was devastating in its quiet authority. Cooper wasn't just challenging Meghan's financial practices, he was challenging her entire claim to moral authority. The contrast between his decades of legitimate service and her monetized version of charity was too stark to ignore. "This interview is over," Meghan declared, her composure now completely shattered. "I came here in good faith to discuss meaningful work, and instead I've been subjected to a coordinated attack designed to undermine everything I've tried to build. This isn't journalism. This is harassment, and I won't tolerate it for another second." She began gathering her belongings with shaking hands, her movements sharp and angry. The carefully orchestrated image that had taken years to construct was now in complete ruins, and everyone watching could see the real person beneath the public relations facade. "The American people deserve better than this kind of sensationalized character assassination," she continued, her voice now carrying a tremor of barely suppressed rage. "They deserve honest reporting, not manufactured controversy designed to destroy people who are trying to make a difference." Cooper remained seated, his expression professional even as chaos erupted around him. "The questions about financial transparency will remain whether you stay or leave, Meghan. Accountability doesn't end because an interview does." His words followed her as she stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor. The sound echoed through the space like gunshots, each step taking her further from any possibility of salvaging the situation. At the edge of the set, she turned back one final time, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys," she said, the threat hanging in the air like a final act of defiance. "This network will regret the way it treated me tonight." With that, she disappeared from view, leaving behind a stunned studio audience and millions of viewers who had just witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations in television history. Cooper sat quietly for a moment, allowing the gravity of what had just occurred to settle over the audience. "We'll be right back," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of a journalist who had just done exactly what journalism is supposed to do: hold power accountable, ask difficult questions, and let the truth speak for itself. As the cameras cut away, viewers across America were left with the undeniable reality of what they had witnessed: a carefully constructed public image completely dismantled by the simple application of facts, accountability, and relentless journalistic integrity.